All the usual things people credit when they don't yet understand what actually holds two people together. Her name is Lena. Mine is Mark. We met when neither of us had much. That mattered to me at the time. It felt fair, balanced, like whatever we were building would start from the same ground. I was wrong about that part. Back then, we split checks without talking about it. We chose places that didn't require planning or justification. We didn't compare lifestyles because there wasn't much to compare. Money was invisible, which is another way of saying it hadn't become powerful yet. Things changed slowly, so slowly that it felt natural. A promotion for me, a better apartment, new responsibilities, longer hours, more pressure disguised as progress. Lena noticed before I did. She started saying things like, "You work too much," or "You don't need to push this hard." At first, it sounded caring, supportive. I appreciated it. But appreciation has a way of turning into suspicion when you're tired enough. The first time money entered our conversations directly, it wasn't a fight. It was a comment. Casual, almost joking. She said, "It must be nice not to check prices anymore." I laughed and said I still check them. She smiled and said, "Sure." That smile stayed with me longer than it should have. After that, I began noticing how often money framed our decisions. Not openly, subtly. Where we went, who paid, what felt reasonable now compared to before. She never asked me for anything directly. That's important. Instead, she would mention things, trips she'd love to take someday, furniture she liked, apartments she said felt more us than where we were living. None of it was unreasonable. That was the problem. I started feeling like the only one who noticed the shift, like I was translating everything through a lens she didn't acknowledge existed. When I paid, she thanked me, always sincerely. When she paid, she joked about it, like it was temporary, like we both knew it wouldn't always be this way. I didn't ask what she meant. I started telling myself stories instead. Stories are cheaper than conversations. I told myself she liked the security more than me, that the version of me who struggled wouldn't be enough anymore, that maybe she was staying because leaving would be inconvenient. I hated myself for thinking it, but the thought didn't leave. One night, after a long day, I caught myself watching her as she talked about her plans, not listening, measuring, calculating, wondering how much of her future included my income rather than my presence. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not anger, distance. Money, I realized, doesn't just change lifestyles, it changes how you interpret intention. And once that happens, even love starts feeling like it needs proof. I didn't say anything to Lena. I just started paying attention. Once the thought appeared, it didn't stay contained. It followed me into ordinary moments, into decisions that used to feel automatic. I started noticing how often I reached for my wallet before Lena did, not because she expected it, but because I assumed she did. That assumption became my responsibility, and then, slowly, my resentment. When we went out, I began choosing places carefully, not because I couldn't afford more, but because I wanted to see what would happen if I didn't. I told myself it was a test, though I never admitted that word out loud. She didn't complain. She never did. And somehow that made it worse. When I suggested something simple, she went along with it easily. When I splurged, she thanked me warmly but didn't act surprised, as if both versions of me were equally acceptable. I couldn't tell which one she preferred. At work, my responsibilities grew. So did my income. With every raise, I felt a strange mix of pride and pressure, like I had crossed into a role I hadn't auditioned for. Provider, anchor, stability. Lena started talking more about the future, not in demands, in outlines. What would make sense next? What would be smart? She said we should think long term. I agreed, but I heard something else underneath. I heard expectation. One evening, she mentioned a friend of hers who had just gotten engaged. She described the ring, the proposal, the trip afterward. She said she was happy for her. Then she added, casually, that it must feel nice to know someone is fully committed. I nodded. I didn't ask what she meant. That night, lying awake beside her, I wondered whether commitment now had a price tag attached to it, whether the timing of my success had quietly become part of her calculus. I hated that word, calculus. It made her sound strategic, opportunistic, like someone who loved outcomes more than people. And yet, I was the one doing the math. I began tracking expenses more closely, not because money was tight, but because I wanted to feel control over something that suddenly felt ambiguous. I told myself this was responsible, but responsibility, I learned, can be a cover for distrust. There were moments when I almost asked her directly, when the words hovered close enough to feel dangerous. Do you love me or the life I can give you? Each time I swallowed them, because asking would mean admitting how far my thoughts had drifted. It would mean risking an answer I wasn't ready to hear. So instead, I watched. I noticed how she spoke about my job with other people, proud, almost protective, how she framed my long hours as ambition, not absence. I couldn't tell if she was defending me or the version of our life that depended on me staying exactly where I was. The strangest part was this: nothing was wrong. Not objectively, not obviously, but I felt like I was being slowly redefined without consent, like my value was becoming measurable in ways that had nothing to do with who I was when we started. One afternoon, as we sat together on the couch, Lena rested her head on my shoulder and said she felt lucky. I asked her why. She said because she felt safe with me. That word landed heavier than she realized. Safe. I smiled, wrapped my arm around her, played the part. But inside, something hardened. Because safety, I realized, can mean love, or it can mean shelter. And I was no longer sure which one she saw when she looked at me. The conversation started in the least dramatic way possible. We were sitting at the kitchen table, bills spread out between us, not because we were struggling, but because Lena said it might be smart to look at things together. Together. That word mattered. She spoke calmly, thoughtfully, pointing out patterns: rent, utilities, savings, long-term plans. She wasn't asking for more. She wasn't demanding anything. She was organizing. I listened, nodding, pretending I already wasn't bracing myself. At one point, she said it made sense for me to handle most of the bigger expenses, since my income was more stable. She framed it as logic, not expectation. I agreed, out loud. Inside, something tightened, because stability in her mouth sounded like obligation. I started noticing how often my contribution was described in terms of structure, foundation, support, security, how rarely it was described as choice. She asked if I was okay with the arrangement. I said yes. What I meant was, I don't know how to say no without sounding selfish. That night, I replayed the conversation in my head. Not her words, my reactions to them. How quickly I had defaulted to agreement. How easily my role had been defined. I realized something uncomfortable. We hadn't decided this together. It had just happened. Over the next few weeks, the pattern solidified. I paid, She managed, she planned, I provided. She thanked me often, too often. Gratitude, when repeated, starts to feel like acknowledgement of debt. I began keeping mental track, not of numbers, of moments. Times I paid for something without discussion, times she assumed, times she didn't. I told myself I was being unfair, but fairness is difficult to assess when power isn't equal. One evening, she mentioned wanting to quit her job eventually. Not now, just someday. Something less stressful, something more fulfilling. She said it lightly, like an idea still forming. I felt my chest tighten. I asked how she imagined that working. She said we'd figure it out, that I was good at figuring things out. That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have, because it didn't include her. I realized then that money hadn't changed how much she valued me. It had changed how much she relied on me. And reliance, when it's uneven, starts to look like entitlement, even when it's unintentional. A few days later, we were at a friend's place. Someone joked about me being the responsible one in the relationship. Lena laughed. Not loudly, not mockingly, comfortably. I smiled along. But on the drive home, the silence felt heavier. I wondered whether I had become a role before I became a partner, whether she saw me as someone she loved or someone she built her future around because it made sense. Those two things can coexist, but they don't feel the same. That night, lying awake beside her, I realized the question wasn't whether Lena was with me for my money. The question was whether I still knew what part of me she was with me for. And once that question exists, it demands an answer, whether you're ready for it or not. The argument didn't start as an argument. It started as a suggestion. Lena said it might make sense to upgrade the apartment. Nothing extravagant, just something closer to work, brighter, more aligned with where we are now. She said it carefully, like someone placing a fragile object on the table. I asked what she meant by where we are. She smiled and said, stable, established. That word again. I asked how much she thought something like that would cost. She gave me a number that made my jaw tighten, not because I couldn't afford it, but because she said it without hesitation, like the math had already been done. I asked whether she had considered staying where we were and saving more aggressively. She paused. Then she said we were already saving, that I was doing well, that it didn't feel unreasonable to enjoy it a little. It, not us. I pointed that out, gently. I said it felt like every decision now was filtered through what my income made possible, not what we actually wanted together. She frowned, not defensively, confused. She said she didn't understand why I was making this about money when money wasn't the point. That sentence landed like a quiet insult, because money had become the point, just not one she felt. I told her it felt like I was carrying the weight of decisions I didn't fully agree with, that my financial growth had quietly turned into an expectation that I would absorb more responsibility, more pressure, more risk. She said I thought I liked being reliable. I said reliability shouldn't mean obligation. The room went still. She asked if I thought she was using me. The question came out sharper than anything else she'd said. I hesitated. That hesitation was answer enough. She looked hurt, genuinely. She said she had never asked me for anything I couldn't afford, that she contributed in her own ways, that relationships weren't transactions. I agreed. And then I said something I hadn't planned to say. I said I didn't know anymore whether she loved me or the version of me who made her feel safe. The silence that followed was different from the ones before. This one didn't protect anything. She said that was unfair, that safety wasn't a flaw, that wanting stability didn't make her shallow or calculating. I knew, but it made me feel invisible. She asked how. I said because the things she valued lately, comfort, security, predictability, all came from me changing, not from us choosing together. She cried then, quietly, not theatrically. She said she missed when things were simple, when we didn't analyze every choice, when money didn't feel like a third presence in the room. I missed that too. But simplicity, I realized, had been built on equality, and equality had quietly disappeared. We didn't resolve anything that night. We went to bed exhausted, backs turned, the space between us filled with words we hadn't known how to say sooner. As I lay there, I understood something clearly for the first time. This wasn't about whether I had more money. It was about who got to decide what that money meant. And for the first time, I wasn't sure that was me anymore. After that conversation, we became careful with each other. Not kinder, just more deliberate. We spoke less about money directly, but it lingered in everything else, in pauses, in choices that were suddenly postponed, in plans that stayed vague longer than they needed to. Lena stopped bringing up the apartment, stopped mentioning future upgrades. It wasn't compromise, it was restraint. And restraint, I learned, can feel like punishment when it's unspoken. I noticed how often she waited now, waited for me to decide where we went, what we did, whether something was worth it. She hadn't always done that. It felt like she was trying to prove something, that she wasn't demanding, that she could adapt. That effort hurt more than expectation ever had, because it made me realize how much power I had gained without asking for it, and how uncomfortable she felt acknowledging it. At work, my days grew longer, not because they had to, but because staying late felt easier than going home to conversations that circled the same tension. I caught myself wondering whether Lena would still be here if the direction reversed, if my income dropped, if stability became uncertainty. I hated that thought, but it didn't leave. One evening, she asked if we were okay. The question wasn't emotional, it was logistical, like someone checking the condition of something they didn't know how to repair. I said I wasn't sure. She nodded slowly, as if she had expected that answer. She said she felt like she was walking on unstable ground, that she didn't know which version of herself I trusted anymore, the one who loved me or the one who benefited from my success. I told her I didn't trust either version completely. That honesty landed hard. She asked what that meant for us. I said it meant I needed space, not because I didn't care, but because I needed to understand whether my resentment came from fear or from truth. She went quiet. Then she said something that surprised me. She said she had started feeling small next to me, not financially, emotionally, like she was being evaluated instead of chosen. That sentence reframed everything, because I realized I had been watching her the same way I watched my expenses, carefully, suspiciously, always looking for imbalance. I told her I didn't want to feel like a resource in my own relationship. She said she didn't want to feel like a liability. We sat with that. No accusations, no raised voices. Just two people realizing how deeply money had changed the language between them. Later that night, I suggested we take a break. Not a breakup, not a dramatic exit, just distance. Time to exist without roles attached. She asked how long. I said I didn't know. She said that scared her more than a clear ending would have. I said it scared me too. The next morning, she packed a small bag. Not everything, just enough to leave without committing to leaving. I watched from the doorway again, a position I was starting to recognize. When she hugged me before leaving, she didn't say she loved me. Neither did I. not because it wasn't true, but because we didn't know what it meant anymore. As the door closed, the apartment felt larger, quieter, and for the first time, I wasn't sure whether the space I needed would bring clarity or confirm what I had been avoiding, since money stopped being invisible. The apartment felt different after Lena left. Not empty, unclaimed. Her things were still there, books on the shelf, a mug she liked, a jacket hanging by the door, but the energy of decision was gone. What remained was suspension. Days passed without structure. I worked, I ate, I slept, but every routine felt provisional, like it was waiting for instructions that never arrived. Lena and I didn't talk much during that time. A few messages, neutral, practical. She asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. Neither of us believed it. Without her presence, I started noticing things I hadn't allowed myself to before. How often I had equated control with safety. How quickly I had let numbers define meaning.
It's a vacancy. Love don't live here anymore. Now let's add some excitement to this, and then we're going to bring it home. That was boring, but
I wasn't expecting her to fuck somebody else. So when I got back with her the other day, she dropped the bomb on me. I said, did you have sex with anybody else by the 10 days we wasn't with each other? She said, yeah, I did. You're a fucking slut. You're a slut. And if it wasn't because of me being a stand-up dude, I would have had you lock her ass up and put her the fuck away. Goddamn, 10 days? 10 days. I wasn't expecting her to fuck somebody else. So when I got back...